CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Ukraine's capital is targeted by Russian airstrikes. Kyiv says all 18 missiles were intercepted.
Our other headlines: the Council of Europe meets for the first time in almost 20 years and looks to hold Russia accountable for the war in Ukraine.
Talks to avert a US debt default come down to the wire as the Treasury warns the government could run out of money by the end of the month.
The numbers game: Vodafone slashes 11,000 jobs as the new boss says the company's performance is not good enough. And we're at the Cannes Film Festival, where the world's next big movies are big business. Russia has launched a fresh attack on Kyiv, with Ukraine saying an exceptional barrage of missiles was fired at the capital. Ukraine says it shot down all 18 missiles, but is still assessing the damage. Moscow says the missiles hit their intended targets. At least 3 people were injured. The strikes came as Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky ended his diplomatic tour of Europe to try to secure more military support. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Shelby Wilder in Kyiv. Shelby, this is the 8th Russian air attack to hit the capital this month.
Yes, it was another sleepless night here in Kyiv as Russia launched an intense wave of attacks, one of the largest strikes carried out since this conflict began. Air raid sirens called out around 2:30 this morning, and less than an hour later, Russia had attacked Ukraine from the north, south and east, launching various types of missiles and drones. These were fired by land, air and sea. These included 6 Kinjal hypersonic missiles, 9 caliber cruise missiles, 3 ballistic missiles, 6 kamikaze drones and 3 unmanned aerial vehicles, but 18 missiles in total. And touching specifically on the Kinjal hypersonic missile, this travels 5 to 10 times the speed of sound. The Kremlin has said that it is invincible because it's incredibly difficult to intercept. But now, with Western support in regards to air defense for Ukraine, Ukraine has managed to intercept them. The first time this was recorded was earlier this month on May 4th, when Russia launched another wave of attacks at the Ukrainian capital, and 1 Kinjal hypersonic missile was intercepted. And then this morning, Ukraine says that they had shot down 6 of these Kinjal hypersonic missiles, which really just shows the effectiveness of this newly deployed Western air defense. But otherwise, all incoming air targets launched by Russia at Kyiv were destroyed, but debris was scattered across Kyiv. Parts of debris hit numerous cars that were burst into flames. They also hit a residential building. A piece of debris even landed in the Kyiv Zoo. We heard Mayor Vitaly Klitschko say that 3 civilians had been injured. And otherwise, we heard the head of the Kyiv City Military Administration say that this assault by Russia was, quote, exceptional, end quote. And that's because of the sheer variety and number of missiles that were launched in such a short period of time. Jamie.
Shelby, let's put Kyiv to one side for a moment and talk about the current situation in another theatre of the military in Bakhmut as the counter-offensive there continues.
Yes, so in and around the embattled city of Bakhmut in the Donetsk region, we heard Ukraine's military say that they managed to push back Russian forces from key routes in that city. They said that they have claimed more districts, along with the breaking news we just heard is that they said they have liberated substantial areas to the north and south of Bakhmut. And in some parts, it's believed to have pushed back, Ukraine's military pushing back Russian forces up to 2 kilometers. Otherwise, Ukraine's military has said that Russia is now mostly in defensive positions, that they are digging in. that they do not have the capabilities to carry out large-scale offensive actions. But Ukraine added that Russia still has the capability to be carrying out continued strikes with missiles and drones like we saw early this morning. And otherwise, in regards to civilian toll near the front lines in the last 24 hours, we know that 6 people have been killed in the Kharkiv and Donetsk region from Russian strikes there, Jamie.
Shelby, thank you for that. Our correspondent Shelby Wilder in Kyiv.
Russia says its overnight strikes on Kyiv were aimed at Ukrainian fighting units and ammunition storage sites. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow. Stuart, what more do we know from Russia about this attack?
Well, it hasn't responded directly to the statements coming out of Ukraine about what is being alleged there, but it does say independently on its Telegram channels and social media accounts, the Russian Ministry of Defense says indeed it was armed forces of Ukraine, weapons, ammunition and other military equipment that were being targeted. Now, it claims all of those were destroyed, that all of its aims were achieved, and that they have been neutralized, these targets that the Russian Ministry of Defense was aiming for. But also, specifically, it claims to have hit one of the US-made Patriot anti-air systems that is being used by Ukraine to prevent exactly these kinds of attacks.
And Stuart, let's talk about the Black Sea grain deal, which is due to end in a matter of days. Has Russia given any indication that it's prepared to extend the deal?
It's given an indication that it hasn't made its mind up yet, which means that for now it seems, at least publicly here in Russia, that there is still a chance something could be arranged that would see it renewed. The Ukrainian ambassador to Turkey also seems to feel that way, saying earlier that there is the possibility of a renewal, that online negotiations will take place over the next 2 days. The Kremlin still says its concerns have not been fully addressed, so it's still pessimistic about the possibility, but the possibility is still there.
Stuart, thank you very much. That's our correspondent, Stuart Smith, in Moscow. European leaders are meeting in the Icelandic capital of Reykjavik in a show of support for Ukraine.
The 46-member Council of Europe, a human rights body founded after the Second World War, has only met 4 times. Russia was suspended from the group last year following its invasion of Ukraine. Let's talk to our correspondent, Natalie Malhas, in Brussels. Natalie, what can we expect to come out of this exceptional meeting?
Well, the overwhelming talking point to come out of the Council of Europe's 2-day summit in the Icelandic capital is going to be Ukraine, reaffirming support for Ukraine and its war effort and all the developments in the country at the moment. We know to date around 68 billion euro has already been spent in funding Ukraine's war effort. Additional support will be asserted. We're also hearing from representatives that are expected to be arriving any minute now in the Icelandic capital that military support will also be bolstered by way of training up of the soldiers. The logistics of that support will be ironed out over the next 2 days, but the agenda is clear. Backing Ukraine and its war effort is top of the talking points and on the table. By the end of Wednesday, after the 2 days of talking, the 46-member Council of Europe will have drawn up what it's calling a register of damage, which is an evidence log of dated and detailed incidents of loss, damage and injuries incurred as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Natalie, obviously Ukraine top of the agenda, but Turkey's membership is being considered too. What more do we know about that?
Turkey may follow Russia in being expelled from the Council if it doesn't heed the human rights objectives of the Council of Europe. This is related to its failure to implement a 2019 court ruling related to the release of philanthropist and businessman Osman Kavala, who was arrested back in 2017 for his alleged dissenting opinions, political activism and human rights activism in the country. At the time, the Human Rights Court of Europe had slammed Kavala's arrest, saying that this was tantamount to the silencing of human rights defenders and that there was insufficient evidence for his arrest and for him to be tried on any of the alleged offences that he was incarcerated for. Should Turkey not heed the human rights obligations of the Council of Europe, it could have its membership revoked and be booted from the Council. But at the moment, we're seeing the Committee of Ministers that are so far focused on conversation, negotiation, and optimistic that it can convince the Turkish government to do the right thing. Should they not, they would be following the Russian example and be booted from the Council.
Natalie, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Natalie Malhas, in Brussels.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has brought together leaders from across the UK food industry, including farmers and supermarket bosses, to try and find a solution to record-high food costs.
But the producers are also facing their own challenges, as our correspondent Lee Jianhua found out when he visited a farm outside London.
Come on!
Will Dickinson has been managing his farm just north of London for decades. But high inflation is putting a strain on business, with prices rising across the board.
I think that there is a distinct lack of fairness in the food supply chain. And my costs, for example, fuel has gone up nearly 60% in this time. Fertiliser went completely crazy. Last year we were paying up to £1,000 a tonne for fertiliser. It has come back now, but it's still about 180% of where it was, so it's still nearly double where it was.
Will is also managing this wheat field where returns are low, with profit margins currently running as low as 2%. He switched to an organic fertiliser, digestate, to try to boost yield and cut costs. Some have taken more drastic measures. This is an orchard in Kent, the southeast of London. To minimise losses, its owner James Smith has had to remove about 80% of the trees this year.
I don't really want to get rid of all of my fruit, but I simply cannot see a way of overcoming all of the challenges of growing, picking, storing the crop, only to know that our retailers in the UK largely refuse to pay us a viable price for what we've done.
He says he lost over $180,000 last year and plans to use the land for livestock, a vineyard and a shop. In response, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has set out new support for farmers. It includes better transparency and contracts in pork and dairy markets. Up to $38 million will also be invested in new breeding technologies. For consumers at the very end of the supply chain, the question is not only when prices will go down, but will they stop going up? In March, groceries cost 19% more than they did a year before, the biggest annual rise in more than 45 years. Multiple factors are contributing to the current food price inflation across the UK, including poor harvests in Europe and North Africa, the rising transport costs, Brexit, the weak pound, and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has promised to halve inflation this year as one of his priorities before the next election. But the question is, does he have any concrete and effective measures to fulfill his promise? Lee Jianhua, CGTN, London.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. China's April economic data shows slowing momentum after an initial burst of consumer activity earlier in the year.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world. accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. China has posted economic data for April showing positive momentum across key sectors, but falling short of expectations. The country's service sector grew 13.5% year-on-year, while retail sales were up more than 18% on the same period, the quickest growth in 2 years, but less than the 21% target. Industrial output was up 5.6% in the 12 months to April, an improvement on the previous month, but again missing targets set by analysts. China's job market remained broadly stable, with unemployment falling slightly by 0.1% to a level of just over 5%. Well, let's talk to Xiaolin Chen, who's head of international at Crane Shares. Good to see you. So these figures broadly missed expectations, didn't they? Why is that?
They did miss market expectation. I think market has a high expectation to see significant improvements quickly. I think market needs a bit of a patience in many ways. I'd like to point out the fact every data released in the last 3-4 months now, the data we have full month, all showing positive momentum, all showing recovery sign, all is on the right track. It confirms the recovery is happening, probably at a slower or bit of a gradual pace than the investors would like to see. I like to also point out some of the Chinese internet companies are releasing their results, their Q1's results this week. This is a big week for China's or Chinese internet company to release their results. Baidu released their result earlier today. The revenue grown 10+%. Adjusted net income growth over 48%. I think we just need a little bit of a patience to the Chinese market. But the good news is the directions is on the right direction. The economy is on gradually, slowly on back of its own track to recover and potentially deliver a 6% GDP return for this year.
So investors need some patience then, you think. How have they reacted to these figures?
To be fair, a lot of the investors that are going into this rally, we have seen particularly in the ADRs, the Chinese ADRs rally we have seen from last Friday as a pain trade. I think we discussed this in the past, is a lot of the active managers are still underweight internet sectors, Chinese e-commerce names in their portfolio, broadly speaking. The positive earnings going to be released, hopefully, fingers crossed, for the other names in the sector also going to deliver as a good results as Baidu did today. That could beat market expectations. We see an earlier rally in ADRs that we also see active managers are trying to close that underweight allocations as soon as possible to not make them look awkward or in the negative alpha when they look at their performance attribution with their own clients.
So do you think we'll see any changes from the government perhaps in order to reinvigorate this growth, moving in the right direction perhaps, but perhaps not as much as some would like?
Great question. Policymakers in China is fully aware the global uncertainties, to many extents, the challenges that face Chinese manufacturing activities. That's why they be very proactive in introducing supportive policies to the corporates, introducing or allowing more local bond issuance, etc. I think it's highly unlikely you will see billions of dollars of injection into China's equity market or capital markets altogether. but you will see more individual targeted measure introduced by the Bank of PBOC as a liquidity injection. And I'd like to see more physical spending. That actually will be one stone could potentially kill two birds, with also help on the employment market, particularly for the young people, young employees to back to the workforce. So I'd like to see policymakers step up a bit more in more aggressive in physical spending.
Well, you mentioned the employment market there. What about those employment levels we're seeing in China? What impact are they having?
The unemployment rate, particularly for the young people around 16 to 24, are at the double digits, around 20% of unemployment rate. That's quite high when you compare to historically. But I still personally think that is actually a job relatively easier to fix if they could spend more physical on green infrastructure projects as one. Second, once you see, and which you have already seen, service sector like hotels, restaurants are actually producing impressive returns in their Q1 revenues. When that happens, they will start to hire more people to do their business, expand their business, as they have reduced, their employee during pandemic time. That can solve a lot of the employee problems for that. Corporates are being cautious in capex spending. I think in return, good policy introduced, which you have seen some sign and confirmation in the April Politburo meetings that the policymaker reconfirmed. They definitely pro-growth. I think it's a chain. Once you see that happening, households will be more willing to spend, and you will see more consumer power pick up.
Charlene Chen, Head of International at Crane Shares. Good to talk to you, as always. Thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Well, China's aiming to boost business with Europe as a huge gathering gets underway in Ningbo. Companies there are looking to capitalise on trade ties, which have flourished despite Estonia and Latvia pulling out of a cooperation agreement last year. Our correspondent Wu Bin reports.
The bilateral trade volume between China and the Central and Eastern European countries, or CEECs, have rapidly grown by a recent annual rate of more than 8%. And a 5-day expo in East China's coastal city of Ningbo is aiming to further strengthen the trade and economic cooperation between the two sides.
The trade scale between China and CEECs exceeds $100 billion, an increase of 1.6 times in 10 years. The two-way investment continues to expand, with a cumulative investment scale of nearly $20 billion.
Over 3,000 exhibitors, over 400 of them are from foreign countries, attending the expo, and more than 10,000 purchasers also registered to find quality products to import from Central and Eastern Europe. As the guest of honor this year, Hungary is participating with a delegation led by its foreign minister.
We Hungarians do not consider China as if it was either a risk or a threat. But we do consider China as a country, cooperation with which brings a lot of profit and benefit.
The China-CEEC cooperation mechanism was born in 2012 against the backdrop of the European debt crisis. Over the years, cooperation in sectors like energy, infrastructure, logistics, and automobile parts has brought substantial benefits to each side.
Well, Slovakia is a very active member of the CEC Expo, and we are participating every year since 2015 because we see there's a great opportunity to present ourselves here in Ningbo in Zhejiang province.
Since the establishment of the mechanism in 2012, leaders of China and the CEECs have met 8 times. And in 2021, Chinese President Xi Jinping said China aims to import products that are worth over $170 billion from Central and Eastern European countries in the next 5 years. And organizers of the expo are vowing to facilitate reaching this goal with a focus of agricultural products and consumer goods. Wu Bin, CGTN, Ningbo, Zhejiang Province.
US President Joe Biden will meet House Speaker Kevin McCarthy later for more talks on raising the country's debt ceiling.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has warned that failure to reach an agreement could spark a new financial crisis. Our correspondent John Terrett is in New York. John, well, here we are again, another day, another round of debt talks. What may happen?
I know. Well, I wouldn't expect too much. I must warn you at the very top, OK? So the meeting is at 19 hours GMT, so that's less than 3 hours to go now. Another very important day at the White House. And it follows on from last Tuesday, when I was on the programme telling you about the meeting then, from which there was zero progress. And on Friday, they were all supposed to meet again, but they all cancelled. They all agreed no point in meeting because there has been zero progress, and they've been talking over the weekend as well. Now, we have the stars of the show today, Joe Biden, President, and Kevin McCarthy, who is the Speaker of the House and the de facto leader of the Republican Party. There will be other key members of the Congress there, just like there were last Tuesday. And it comes sort of 24 hours or so after Janet Yellen, who's the Treasury Secretary, reiterated her stance that the U.S. will run out of money on the 1st of June. She's not messing around here. This is going to happen in or around the 1st of June. And she said to the politicians in a letter, look, you've really got to have a deal before the 1st of June, if possible, if not on the 1st of June. Time, she said, is running out. These people here are rather rattled by this. They're subdued. I mean, they're not panicking, which is one reason why I don't think there's going to be a deal today. If they were panicking, much more likely that there'd be a deal, but they're pretty sanguine about things at the moment because they think here that a deal will be done eventually. Now, Joe Biden is optimistic, but no one knows why, because no progress has been made. The White House people have been on the Hill all weekend, and I think Kevin McCarthy has added more restrictions to the Republicans agreeing to raise the debt ceiling than less. So that's a problem going into this meeting. And here's another problem that I bet you didn't know. Joe Biden is taking off tomorrow, Wednesday, for an 8-day tour of Asia. He's going to Hiroshima for the G7 leaders meeting in Japan. He's going to Papua New Guinea, and he's going to Australia as well. So he won't be around for the next 8 days. Kevin McCarthy says an American president should worry about American problems and not go. But I think Biden is going to go. The only thing I can say that may be hopeful is that Kamala Harris, the vice president, will be present today. She was not there last week. She will be there today, and I think that the Biden thinking is that maybe they can make some progress today. She can manage things over the next week, and he can fly back in a week on Thursday and maybe sign some kind of deal. I think that's the thinking, but I wouldn't expect a deal today.
John, some compulsive viewing taking place, some failed bank executives being grilled on Capitol Hill.
Yes, well, it was pretty... I mean, do you remember when they grilled the poor old head of TikTok, that young man from Singapore? They went after him big time. Do you remember that? Well, it was a bit like that today, really, this time for two of the three leaders of the three banks that have gone under recently. The three banks are Silicon Valley Bank, that was the first one, followed by Signature Bank here in New York, and of course First Republic was eventually taken over by JP Morgan Chase last week or the week before. Anyway, the point is two of those bosses turned up today and they faced very, very tough questions, and the man that took the brunt of it was called Greg Becker. Greg Becker is or was the CEO of Silicon Valley Bank. And this is what he had to say. He said, look, we were operating around about the 9th of March, the 10th of March, in unprecedented territory that we'd never really met before. This was caused, the run on the bank was caused by the rate hikes that have been done by the central bank, the Federal Reserve. He said, this was the fastest bank run in history. $42 billion went out of that bank, Silicon Valley, in just 6 hours. It's pretty extraordinary. And he blamed social media for that. And indeed, we can blame his management team for letting people know that if there was to be a run on the bank, they wouldn't be able to meet all their obligations, and that's exactly what happened. He said today that they had 41 billion of the 42 billion covered, but anyway, the bank went down. He said, I am truly sorry, and he apologized to the staff, the clients, and the shareholders. But I don't think being truly sorry quite cuts it. Republicans on that committee have just accused him of a lack of judgment, bringing the bank down. And that same committee, which is the Senate Banking Committee, will wrap up its work today and will resume again later in the week, I think on Thursday, when they meet the regulators, who also failed in many respects. Guys?
John, thank you for that. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
Regulators in the United States are considering deposit insurance reforms to protect banking customers.
This follows the collapse of the 4 U.S. banks, which has, of course, sparked fears of a repeat of the 2008 global financial crisis, something that was triggered largely by American banks taking excessive lending risks. Our correspondent Owen Fairclough reports.
French daredevil Nathan Paulin is the ultimate risk taker, setting slackline walking world records from Paris to Rio with just a harness but no safety net below if things go badly wrong.
US banks and their customers do have a safety net, and yet a string of US banks collapsed recently, partly due to excessive risk-taking. So regulators are now trying to figure out how to let banks take off without the excessive risk-taking that can bring them crashing down to earth.
The US Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation guarantees customer deposits up to $250,000. But 4 banks that recently collapsed over capital shortfalls had accepted deposits far beyond that.
We're here to protect you guys up to the insurance limit.
At Silicon Valley Bank, around 90% of deposits exceeded that threshold. Panicked customers bankrupted it by withdrawing around $40 billion in just one day.
Nerve-wracking, a little scared.
SVB grew too fast, too quickly with uninsured deposits and made risky investments with that money. Regulators admit they knew it, but failed to curtail those risks. So, the FDIC is considering how to reform its system with 3 options on the table. 1. Maintain that $250,000 insurance limit. 2. Unlimited coverage. The government backstops all banks and depositors. But some lawmakers think this will only incentivize banks to assume even more risk because they're not accountable for losses. That's known as moral hazard.
Wealthy elites do anything to make a quick profit and pocket the rewards, and when their risky behavior leads to catastrophic failures, they turn to the government.
The FDIC prefers option 3, targeted coverage. This would provide higher protection for deposits used in everyday transactions, but lower protection if deposits are used to invest, so those investors would take responsibility for their risks. But the FDIC admits working out which accounts are used for which purpose is difficult. And just as Nathan Paulin is always looking for the next challenge, some experts warn that no matter the restrictions, banks will always push their own high wire act too far in the pursuit of profit. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Plans for another multi-billion-dollar stock offering for Saudi Aramco are gaining momentum, according to Bloomberg News. The Saudi state is currently Aramco's biggest shareholder, owning just over 90% of the world's biggest oil firm. It's reported to be planning a multi-billion-dollar offering, with proceeds to be transferred to a sovereign wealth fund. The move is seen as part of a plan to diversify Saudi Arabia's economy.
The International Energy Agency says demand for oil is set to hit a record high after China boosted imports and OPEC held steady on production. The IEA expects global demand to rise to 102 million barrels per day, but predicts prices will continue to fall. Officials cited China's recovery from the pandemic as having surpassed expectations.
The former Audi CEO has pleaded guilty to charges related to the Dieselgate emissions scandal. Rupert Stadler admitted he allowed cars with the emissions cheating software to remain on sale, even after he knew about the scam. He's the most senior executive to admit guilt in the scandal that engulfed Audi's parent company Volkswagen in 2015. His confession is part of a plea deal that will see him escape prison.
The number of people working in the UK has fallen for the first time in 2 years. It's being seen as a sign that a stagnant economy is starting to take a toll on the jobs market. The official data shows unemployment rising to 3.9% in the 3 months to March, up from 3.8%.
Campaigning has resumed in Turkey as the country heads for a runoff presidential vote in around 2 weeks' time.
The incumbent president, Erdogan, will face his main opposition rival, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, as CGTN correspondent Mikhail Bar-David now reports. The pair are offering contrasting visions for the future.
The race to determine who the next president of Turkey will be continues, as Turkey's High Election Board announced neither incumbent President Recep Tayyip Erdogan nor his main rival of the Nation Alliance, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, managed to succeed in surpassing the 50% threshold needed to win during the first round.
According to the current unofficial results, Mr. Recep Tayyip Erdogan received 49.51% of the vote. Mr. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu 44.88%, Mr. Sinan Oğan 5.17%, and Mr. Muharrem İnce 0.44%.
%0.44 oy aldığı görülmüştür.
Parties now have the opportunity to present their objections to the High Election Board, which will make their decisions on the objections on Thursday. On Friday, the official election results will be declared. However, it is now clear that Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and presidential candidate Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu will face a runoff election on May 28th. Both leaders made optimistic statements about their chances to win the second round. Kılıçdaroğlu said he would stand tall and stressed he would surely be victorious, while Erdogan emphasized that he had secured a lead of more than 2.5 million votes over his rival Kılıçdaroğlu. During the runoff, the third presidential candidate in Sunday's election, nationalist Sinan Oğan, may be influential if he endorses one of the other candidates, as he managed to secure over 5% of the votes.
We will consult with our voter base for our decision in the runoff, but we already made it clear that the fight against terrorism and sending refugees back are our red lines.
Campaigns for the runoff election are expected to begin at full speed. Erdogan and Kılıçdaroğlu will have 2 weeks to make their final arguments to voters, explaining why they are the best choice to lead Turkey for the next 5 years. Michal Bardavid, CGTN, Istanbul.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, their numbers up. Vodafone axes 11,000 jobs, the biggest cull in the history of the company.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities, reinvent, find new opportunities, discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen axe.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story. Wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Ukraine's capital is targeted by Russian airstrikes. Kyiv says all 18 missiles were intercepted.
Our other headlines, the Council of Europe meets for the first time in almost 20 years and looks to hold Russia accountable for the war in Ukraine.
And talks to avert a US debt default come down to the wire as the Treasury warns the government could run out of money by the end of the month.
Vodafone says it'll cut 11,000 jobs over the next 3 years, the biggest jobs cut in the history of the company.
New CEO Margherita Della Valle says the layoffs are needed to help the telecoms giant regain a competitive edge. It follows a warning that a poor performance in Germany, its biggest market, would hit company cash flow. Shares in Vodafone fell 7%. Well, Susanna Streeter is head of money and markets at Hargreaves Lansdown. Welcome back to the programme, Susanna. Big job losses and a blunt reprimand from the boss. What do you make of Vodafone?
Well, certainly her comments were pretty honest and pretty refreshing, although, of course, it does seem as though investors are really waiting for proof that actually these job cuts will help turn the company around. We don't know the details. It's, of course, extremely painful for those staff watching and waiting to find out whether their department, their division will be affected. We understand that jobs will go at the headquarters in Berkshire in the UK, but also in Italy and Germany. In Germany, operations really have been struggling, but the company's also been weighed down by higher energy costs, for example. However, what the new CEO said was that actually compared to peers, Vodafone simply was not performing well enough, and that something radical needed to happen rather than incremental changes that had been made by her predecessor. So this was, I think, the scale of the job losses did come as a surprise, and now I think investors are just really waiting to see a bit more detail about this restructuring plan.
So are we looking at a Vodafone-specific problem or an industry-wide problem?
Well, certainly the scale and the might needed for the 5G rollouts has slightly been hampering European telecoms companies compared to their US peers. You need an awful lot of power behind you, and actually that's why partly there is this merger which is Vodafone hopes will take place with Three to give them a bit of extra clout. Now, it certainly seems as though the CEO thought that Vodafone really needed to cut costs to really keep up with the competition and become more efficient, because it appears that she believes that they're gaining ground when Vodafone is falling behind. We may still see some efficiencies made by other European telecoms companies because, of course, it's a highly competitive market. And the problem is, when you're looking at competing, there's not much difference in price. Of course, in the cost of living crisis, consumers in particular are going for the cheapest options. And so it's particularly tough right now in the market.
So the new boss talked about problems in Germany. How difficult is that market for them?
Certainly, it is proving to be very difficult, and this was one of the reasons cited for these widespread job cuts. And it's very likely, given the weakness in Germany, that a significant number of the jobs will be there. But also there are plans as well to perhaps sell off the Spanish part of the business. It seems that there's a lot more detail that we need to see before you can really assess the full extent of the plans and exactly what kind of slimmer Vodafone will emerge from all of this.
Susanna, good to see you. Thank you for joining us today. That's Susanna Streeter, Head of Money and Markets at Hargreaves Lansdown.
The number of people not working in the UK due to long-term illness has risen to a new record. Since the start of the pandemic, there are more than 400,000 more people outside the labour market due to ill health, a total of 2.5 million. The rise in mental health issues in younger people, along with back and neck problems, possibly due to home working, are blamed for the rise.
Elon Musk has been told to submit documents to an investigation into the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. A court in the US Virgin Islands wants to know whether the Tesla CEO was referred to JP Morgan Chase by the late sex offender. The Virgin Islands government is suing the bank, accusing it of helping to enable Epstein's sex trafficking. Epstein committed suicide in a New York jail while awaiting trial in 2019.
5 men have been sentenced in Germany for their involvement in a jewellery heist in 2019. The 21 pieces stolen from a museum in Dresden were estimated to be worth just over $100 million and contain more than 4,300 diamonds. Police say most of the stolen jewels have now been recovered.
China has confirmed the arrest of a South Korean international footballer as part of an investigation into bribery. Son Jun-ho appeared at last year's World Cup finals in Qatar and plays for the Chinese club Shandong Taishan. South Korean diplomats say he was arrested on Friday and is receiving consular support. China's foreign ministry says the case is being handled under the rule of law and that the player's rights will be protected.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, take your seat. The glitz and glamour of the Cannes Film Festival returns for its 76th show.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So into the attention of world leaders.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country. There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew. And in these mountains, they recently finished building a power plant.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. France will introduce a new tax credit for environmentally friendly investments, part of a bill to green its economy.
The plan, which will cost around $500 million a year, aims to spur environmentally friendly investments. This all comes as Europe looks to compete with US government support for American companies under its Inflation Reduction Act. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Ross Cullen in Paris. Ross, how's all this going to work then?
Well, the industry represents about 15% of France's greenhouse gas emissions, and they're really going to try to target industry and make it green and make the overall policy towards industrial strategy more environmentally friendly, trying to spur consumers to buy electric vehicles that have been made in France, trying to spur industry to invest in wind and solar projects, saying that the state will cover some of the costs to try to encourage the investment in that sector. Overall, this was 15 different initiatives proposed and presented by the French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire, unveiling this green industry bill, saying that the government wants to try to halve the time it takes to implement such projects, wants to increase the training and increase the focus on trying to have more green technicians and people focused on green engineering in the workforce overall, and trying to ensure that there are further green investments down the line to broaden out the focus on decarbonising the economy. So let's listen in now to a little bit more of what the French Finance Minister Bruno Le Maire had to say.
We want to keep a very close partnership with the United States. We want to develop our economic partnership with China, but we also want to defend our industrial interests, protect our know-how, protect our technologies, protect our workers. Protect our workers, because at the end of the day, it's the workers we're protecting.
Ross, also in Paris today, pro-nuclear countries meeting to discuss nuclear energy in Europe's transition to a lower carbon economy. But nuclear really does divide Europe, doesn't it?
Well, in terms of pro-nuclear, hosting that kind of talks in France, really the vanguard of that side in favour of using nuclear energy. Some 70% of France's daily electricity needs are supplied by its civil nuclear reactors. We've seen other countries in Europe, like Poland and the Czech Republic, try to focus on increasing the nuclear supply in their countries, but other nations in the European Union are trying to decrease their reliance on nuclear energy, saying that it is not safe, particularly over waste disposal. We know that Germany is phasing out its use of nuclear. We know that Austria and Luxembourg have taken the EU to court over their use of the terminology of green to describe nuclear as environmentally friendly. Now, while it might not be that particularly environmentally friendly as far as Austria and Luxembourg sees it, for France, it's a way of ensuring that you are using a type of energy output that has very few emissions.
Ross, thank you for that. Our correspondent, Ross Cullen, in Paris.
It's the 76th edition of the world's biggest film festival, and the red carpet has been rolled out in Cannes as the stars arrive in the south of France.
21 films competing for the much-coveted main prize, the Palme d'Or. Cannes will see a record number of female directors this year, as well as premieres from 3 of the biggest directors in the business: Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese and Wes Anderson. Hollywood A-listers like Leonardo DiCaprio, Natalie Portman and Harrison Ford will also be there to grace the quartet.
Well, I've been speaking to festival juror and secretary at the UK Critics Circle film section, Karen Krasanovic.
It's very exciting tonight. It's the opening night with a film with Johnny Depp returning to acting in a French film where he plays a French king. And everybody's very excited about this, although it is out of competition. We've got 21 big films in competition, 7 of them with female directors, and that is a first for this festival.
So you mentioned Johnny Depp, and he's just one of a large number of big names coming to Cannes. We've got Harrison Ford, we've got the directors Wes Anderson, Martin Scorsese. Is Cannes back to its best?
It's hard to tell with the WGA strike because a lot of filmmakers won't be coming in solidarity with that. It's hard to tell. I mean, Michael Douglas just appeared, was announced maybe 2 days ago that he's suddenly coming here to get an honorary Palme d'Or and also show a documentary about his life that nobody's seen before. So Cannes is full of surprises.
And Martin Scorsese's film, distributed by Apple, but it's also going to be shown in cinemas as well, not just streamed. Is this hybrid model the future, do you think?
Well, this is how filmmakers are making the films that they want to make. It's quite difficult. It's a difficult environment now with cinema going. Sometimes people are losing the habit of going with streaming. And this is very wise of Scorsese to head that way. That way his film gets seen.
So one of the things that's notable about Cannes is that filmmakers come from all around the world to sell their films and to see others. What do those filmmakers get out of coming to Cannes?
Cannes is probably the most famous film festival. It's got, I'm on one jury, there's quite a few juries actually. There's first-time filmmakers, which is one of them that I'm on. But there's also there's a marketplace as well beneath the Palais where deals are made for finance and also for selling finished films. There are short films. There are first-time filmmakers, as I said. This is the place where people come to see what the world has. Unlike Berlin or Venice, the very different film festivals. But Cannes likes controversy, it likes celebrity, it likes glamour, and it likes novelty. So it's a great place to come.
So which of the films that are being shown at Cannes will we all be queuing up to watch in the cinema?
Well, I hate to say we're going to go for old Hollywood, but again, we are really focusing on that this year in 2023. It's going to be the Scorsese with Killers of the Flower Moon, which, if you've read the book, is an absolutely incredible story, and we'll bring a hanky. Also, Wes Anderson's Asteroid City. If you like Wes Anderson, it's more of that. There's Steve McQueen has got a documentary which is 4.5 hours long, and Almodovar's got a short that's 31 minutes long. And there's also, of course, everybody's favorite, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And we have to see how many of the filmgoers are going to know what a dial is.
And from film to football, two Italian giants will face each other in a few hours for a place in the Champions League final. The difference is that Inter Milan and AC Milan are both playing in their home stadium, the iconic San Siro.
The two clubs have ground shared for over 70 years, but they're now making plans to leave. Our correspondent Alex Fraser reports.
A footballing cathedral with one of the best atmospheres in the world. The 75,000-seat Stadio Giuseppe Meazza, known outside of Italy as the San Siro Stadium.
This week it's the hottest ticket in town, where a sold-out crowd will watch the Champions League semi-final between the two sides that call the place behind me home, AC Milan and Inter. However, the future of this grand stadium is uncertain.
Even though it is iconic, facilities for fans lack the comforts of more modern stadiums. Milan and Inter have been joint tenants since 1947. Now they both want to leave, either ground sharing together or by going alone and building two new arenas.
So what they say is that Milan is a financial capital. We got a huge potential, upside potential, to get more money, to have corporate hospitality, and makes a lot of income from the match days. And so we need to rebuild a new one. With those revenues, we can compete on an international level with the English clubs, Real Madrid, Barcelona, PSG, Bayern Munich.
The San Siro is currently owned by the municipality, with both clubs paying a total of €8 million a year in rent. Europe's biggest clubs are able to maximise commercial opportunities with their own stadiums and the surrounding land. Inter's CEO says they could build on a site next to the San Siro, but hasn't ruled out moving outside of the city. AC Milan would like to build a stadium 2 kilometres away in the green area of La Maura. It's currently home to a racecourse and is also a protected ecological area. Protesters formed a human chain around the site, concerned that a new stadium and the development that comes with it would destroy the ecosystem.
This is a green belt around the city. It helps limiting the temperature increase, and also it's a barrier against the pollution. So we do not want a stadium here.
Any plans cannot move forward unless they are voted through by Milan City Council this summer. If the two clubs were to move, it would be difficult for the city to maintain and keep a stadium that's been standing for almost a century. But the idea of pulling it down has met fierce opposition internationally and locally.
The San Siro Stadium cannot be demolished because it is a symbol of Milan, like La Scala, like the Duomo, and Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. Could anyone think of demolishing these symbols of the city? They're crazy to think they could demolish it.
Talk of this great stadium's demise is at the moment premature. It will host the opening ceremony of the 2026 Winter Olympics. Beyond that, its future will be decided by the financial ambitions of these two famous football clubs. Alex Fraser, CGTN, Milan.
The headlines again. Ukraine's capital is targeted by Russian airstrikes. Kyiv says all 18 missiles were intercepted.
The Council of Europe meets for the first time in almost 20 years and looks to hold Russia accountable for the war in Ukraine.
And talks to avert a US debt default come down to the wire as the Treasury warns the government could run out of money by the end of this month.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
And you can go to CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.